They tried to frame my ranch with dead fish and drone videos. 6 sheriff's deputies rolled through my cattle gate 3 days before I was supposed to buy the neighboring 800-acre Pike Ranch. The HOA president stood on television, calling me a danger to the valley. My daughter came home from school, crying after kids called her the polluter's kid. And somebody started throwing legal complaints at my ranch faster than I could stack hay. What they didn't know was my family had been protecting the valley's water since 1911, and the pipeline feeding their entire subdivision ran straight beneath my pasture. If you enjoy stories about land rights, quiet revenge, and people standing their ground the legal way, stick around and subscribe. This one gets a whole lot deeper before it's over. 3 days before I was supposed to sign the papers for the Pike Ranch, 6 sheriff's deputies rolled through my cattle gate at sunrise. I was standing beside the feed shed, with a wrench in one hand and a busted irrigation coupling in the other, when the first cruiser came over the rise. Then another, then 4 more behind it, tires grinding over dry gravel, red and blue lights washing across my pasture like I had robbed a bank instead of fixed a pipe. My daughter Sadie was sitting on her mare near the south fence, 12 years old, boots too big, hat too low, watching grown men step out onto land her great-grandfather had fenced by hand. She looked at me like she wanted me to explain why the law had come to our ranch before breakfast. I could not explain it yet. Sheriff Cole Bennett climbed out last. Cole and I had known each other since high school. He moved slowly, the way a man moves when he already knows the call is stupid, but has to answer it anyway. He rested one hand on his belt and tipped his hat toward me. "Morning, Wade." "Cole," I said, "you bring half the county for coffee." He did not smile. That told me more than the cruisers did. Behind him, Deputy Harris unfolded a printed complaint from a clipboard. The paper was thick, formal, and full of words that did not belong anywhere near cattle country. Complaint alleges unauthorized agricultural expansion, potential illegal feedlot preparation, environmental threat to residential water supply, and unsafe land use activity adjacent to Silver Creek Estates. I stared at him. "Say that again slower," I said. Cole took the paper from Harris and handed it to me. Across the top was the Silver Creek Estates HOA logo, clean blue mountains over a row of perfect houses. Under that was the signature of Vanessa Holloway, HOA president. I knew Vanessa by reputation. White Range Rover, Scottsdale money, subdivision queen. She had moved here 3 years earlier and started calling the valley undiscovered luxury ranch country, which was funny because folks like my family had discovered it with fence posts, frostbite, and unpaid banknotes long before her decorator found rustic furniture. The complaint said, I intended to purchase the neighboring 800-acre Pike Ranch and convert it into a large-scale commercial feedlot. It said my plan would damage property values, contaminate groundwater, increase traffic, and create irreversible harm to the character of the Silver Creek community. None of it was true. The Pike Ranch belonged to Eleanor Pike, 79 years old, widowed, hard-eyed, and tougher than cured leather. Her family had run cattle there for 60 years. I was buying it because she wanted the land kept in grass, not carved into luxury lots with fake wagon wheels at the entrances. I looked past the deputies toward the ridge where Silver Creek Estates sat behind its stucco walls and black iron gates. 220 homes, manicured lawns, blue swimming pools, decorative fountains. A whole neighborhood pretending the water under their feet had no history. Sadie rode closer, slow and careful. Her mare snorted at the flashing lights. "Dad?" she asked. I folded the complaint once, then again. "It's all right, honey." But it was not all right. Not with my daughter watching deputies photograph my hay barn. Not with strangers walking along my fence line like my ranch had become evidence. Not with a woman who had never opened an irrigation gate in her life, calling my family a threat to water. Cole stepped close enough that the other deputies could not hear. "Wade," he said quietly, "this isn't just a sheriff's complaint. The HOA filed with the county commissioners yesterday. State agricultural lender, too. Environmental Review Board got a packet this morning." My hand tightened around the paper. "They're trying to stop the loan." Cole nodded once. "They're trying to stop the whole purchase." Across the pasture, the sun cleared the cottonwoods and lit the Pike Ranch beyond my western fence. 800 acres of grass, creek bottom, and history, waiting on a signature. 3 days from now, it was supposed to become part of my family's future. Now the HOA had sent cops before I even owned it. I looked at the complaint again. Vanessa Holloway had not just picked a fight over cattle. She had moved fast, organized, and public. Too fast. That meant fear. And the question burning in my chest was simple. Why would an HOA panic this badly over one ranch purchase? I got part of the answer the next morning. Sadie found the rock before sunrise. She had ridden out early to open the south gate for the feed delivery truck, her flashlight bouncing against the fence posts while the horses steamed in the cold morning air. A few minutes later, I heard her mare galloping back toward the barn faster than usual. "Dad!" I stepped out of the workshop, wiping grease from my hands. Sadie pulled the horse hard enough that gravel scattered beneath the hooves. "There's something at the gate." She held up a sandstone rock about the size of a football. Thick rubber bands wrapped a folded envelope around it. The paper carried the Silver Creek Estates HOA logo across the front in dark blue ink. Someone had thrown it over my gate during the night. Claire came onto the porch, tying her robe tighter against the morning chill while I opened the envelope. The paper inside was clean, expensive, official-looking. Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association Emergency Resolution. The HOA formally opposed my purchase of the Pike Ranch and requested immediate county intervention to stop commercial agricultural expansion threatening environmental safety and residential property values. At the bottom sat Vanessa Holloway's signature. Bold, careful, confident. Sadie looked from me to Claire. "Why are they doing this?" I folded the paper slowly. "Because they think land belongs to whoever complains the loudest." Claire read the notice over my shoulder. Her jaw tightened when she reached the section calling my ranch operation potentially hazardous. "We've run cattle here 30 years, she said quietly. "Now suddenly we're dangerous?" Not suddenly. Strategically. That part was becoming clearer. An hour later, my phone started ringing. County Zoning Office, Agricultural Lender, Environmental Review Board. 3 separate agencies asking questions about feedlot permits I had never applied for. Somebody had sent packets overnight. Drone photographs of my hayfields, maps of the Pike Ranch, highlighted claims about water contamination risks. Vanessa had not acted emotionally. She had organized this. By noon, the story was already spreading online. Silver Creek residents shared Facebook posts warning about industrial ranch expansion beside their subdivision. One video showed aerial footage of my cattle near Willow Creek, with dramatic music playing underneath like I was dumping chemicals into the river instead of feeding livestock. The comments were worse. Greedy rancher, polluter, cowboy developer. One woman wrote, "These old ranch families think they own Colorado." I stared at the screen long enough that Claire finally took the phone from my hand. "Stop reading it," she said. But I could not stop thinking about one thing. None of these people cared about cattle. They cared about land. That suspicion became certainty late that afternoon. Eleanor Pike called me herself. Her voice sounded tired. "Wade," she said. "That Holloway woman came by again." I straightened in my chair. "Again?" She brought 2 men this time, one in a suit, one taking notes. "What did they want?" "You already know." "I did. They offered more money?" "Cash," Eleanor said bitterly. "Said developers could preserve the valley better than ranchers." I almost laughed at that. Developers preserved land the same way wolves preserved sheep. What did you tell them? I asked. I told them my husband spent 40 years keeping Pike Ranch out of subdivisions. Her voice hardened. And I told them I wasn't selling our land to people who use the word rustic in real estate brochures. That got the first smile out of me all day. But Eleanor was not finished. Wade, she said quietly. They're scared of something. There it was again. Fear, not outrage, not environmental concern. Fear. After we hung up, I walked out to the equipment shed alone. The evening light stretched long across the pasture while irrigation water moved slowly through the ditch beside the barn. I looked west toward the Pike Ranch, 800 acres. Creek access, high grazing ground, and something valuable enough to make an HOA throw rocks at my gate and call the cops before I even signed the papers. Behind me, I heard Sadie step onto the gravel. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded once. Then I pulled a yellow legal pad from the truck and started writing down dates, names, phone calls, everything. Claire watched from the porch but said nothing, because she knew me well enough to understand something important. I was not backing down. I was building a record. And somewhere inside all this noise, Vanessa Holloway had made a mistake she did not know existed yet. The next attack landed on my daughter. Sadie came home from school 3 days later, carrying her backpack low and her shoulders even lower. She usually burst through the kitchen door, talking about horses or basketball practice, or something she and her friends had done at lunch. That afternoon, she barely spoke. Claire noticed it first. "What happened?" Sadie dropped her backpack beside the table without looking up. "Nothing." That word again. Nothing. I had heard it after funerals, after drought years, after banks called loans due. Claire sat beside her carefully. "Sadie." My daughter's eyes finally lifted toward us, red around the edges. "Some kids," said Dad's poisoning the valley. The room went quiet. She tried to shrug it off, but could not quite pull it together. "They called me the polluter's kid." I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not rage. Rage burns hot and fast. This was slower. The kind of anger that learns names and saves paperwork. Claire reached across the table and pulled Sadie close, while I walked to the sink and stared out the kitchen window toward the west pasture. Beyond the fence line, Silver Creek Estates sat bright and polished under the afternoon sun, like it had grown there naturally, instead of replacing grazing land. Someone inside that subdivision had taken this fight to children. That changed things. Sadie wiped her eyes hard, embarrassed by them. "I told them we've had cattle here longer than their houses." "You were right," I said. "They said Dad's building some giant feedlot." Claire looked at me carefully. "How many people are repeating this now?" "Enough," I said. That evening my phone rang 4 separate times. County Sanitation Office. Colorado Livestock Compliance Division. Environmental Quality Investigator. Anonymous complaints. Again. Unsafe machinery, illegal runoff, animal mistreatment. One caller claimed I was burying chemical waste near Willow Creek. Another said I was diverting protected water without permits. By sunset, 2 inspectors had already requested site visits. Vanessa Holloway was not trying to annoy me anymore. She was trying to drown me in investigations before closing day arrived. Sheriff Cole Bennett pulled into the yard just before dark. He stayed leaning against his truck instead of coming inside, which told me the conversation was unofficial. "You got cameras on the south fence yet?" he asked. "Not yet. You should." I folded my arms. "What are you hearing?" Cole glanced toward the highway before answering. "Somebody's leaning hard on county offices. Calls are coming in from HOA residents every few hours. They're pushing a narrative that Pike Ranch becoming part of your operation threatens public safety." I almost laughed at that. Public safety. Cole did not smile. "Wade, somebody wants your financing delayed." That landed heavier than the rest. The State Agricultural Loan Board only needed uncertainty to freeze a ranch purchase. They did not need proof. A pending environmental review alone could delay closing for months. And if that happened, Eleanor Pike would become vulnerable. Developers knew that. I looked toward the dark outline of the neighboring ranch. They're trying to force her into another offer. Cole nodded once. Looks that way. Before leaving, he handed me a photocopy folded into thirds. Thought you should see this. It was an online flyer circulating inside Silver Creek Estates. Protect our valley, stop industrial agriculture expansion. Underneath sat a drone photograph of my ranch, my barns, my cattle, my land. At the bottom was Vanessa Holloway's signature beside the words, "Emergency Community Meeting, Thursday night." Claire read over my shoulder after Cole drove away. She's organizing them. No, I said quietly. She's preparing them. For what? I looked again at the Pike Ranch beyond our fence line. That question stayed with me long after the house went dark. Near midnight, I walked alone to the barn office carrying my father's old brass key ring. The room smelled like dust, machine oil, and old paper. Filing cabinets lined the wall beside shelves stacked with irrigation maps going back decades. In the far corner sat a wooden trunk I had not opened since the year my father died. The lid carried one faded black word burned into the wood: water. I stood there a long moment before kneeling beside it. Then I slid the old brass key into the lock. And when the lid finally creaked open, I realized Vanessa Holloway had started a war she did not remotely understand. The trunk smelled like dust, cedar, and old paper baked through decades of Colorado summers. Inside sat rows of binders, rolled survey maps, handwritten ledgers, and wax-sealed document tubes tied with faded twine. My father had organized everything by year: water, land, easements. I pulled out the oldest folder first. Inside was a yellowed decree stamped by the Colorado Division of Water Resources, Mercer Family Irrigation Priority. Original filing, date, June 14, 1911. I read the document twice before my pulse slowed enough to think clearly again. Senior water rights. Not just grazing rights, not ditch access, control. The next binder hit even harder. Silver Creek Water Cooperative Shareholder Ledger. I flipped pages until I found the Mercer name. My grandfather, then my father, then me, 51% controlling interest. I leaned back slowly against the barn wall. The HOA subdivision had not built its own water infrastructure. It bought access decades earlier, through the Valley Cooperative my family partially owned, which meant every kitchen faucet, lawn sprinkler, pool filter, and decorative fountain inside Silver Creek Estates depended on agreements tied directly to Mercer land. And the deeper I dug, the worse it became for them. The third folder contained easement maps, large blueprints unfolded across the barn floor under the hanging light bulb. A red line crossed my western pasture, cut beneath the old cottonwoods, then continued downhill toward the subdivision. Pipeline route, main residential supply, directly through Mercer property. I found the easement agreement attached behind the map, signed in 1962. Renewable, conditional, transferable only under good faith cooperation between parties. I stared at one sentence long enough that I eventually read it aloud to the empty barn. Landowner reserves right to terminate renewal negotiations upon demonstrated harassment, interference, or fraudulent claims causing material harm. I sat there in silence. Vanessa Holloway had filed false environmental complaints. Her HOA had interfered with my agricultural financing. And now there was a paper trail. Not just morally wrong, legally dangerous. My phone showed 1:14 a.m. when I finally called Marta Reyes. She answered on the third ring, sounding half asleep. Somebody better be dead. Not yet, I said. That woke her up. Marta had handled water law across the San Luis Valley for 20 years. Smart enough to scare developers. Patient enough to survive county politics. My father trusted her more than most judges. What happened? I gave her the short version. HOA complaints, loan interference, the pipeline, the cooperative shares. Silence filled the line for 3 full seconds. Then Marta spoke carefully. Wade, tell me exactly what percentage your family owns. 51. Another silence, then, oh my God. I almost laughed hearing it from her. You're telling me, I said. No, Marta replied. You don't understand yet. I listened while she shifted papers somewhere on her desk. If those easement clauses are valid, and they sound valid, the HOA just attacked the majority shareholder, controlling future renewal negotiations on their residential water supply. I looked back down at the maps spread across the floor. Suddenly, the panic made sense. The Pike Ranch bordered the Upper Creek corridor. If I bought it, Mercer Land would control nearly the entire western side of the valley's water access route. Vanessa Holloway had not been afraid of cattle. She had been afraid of leverage. Marta's voice sharpened. Do not contact the HOA. I wasn't planning to. Do not threaten them. Do not mention the cooperative. Do not even hint you found this. I smiled slightly in the dark. Already ahead of you. Good, she said. Because if they keep filing fraudulent claims while knowing these agreements exist, they're digging themselves into something very expensive. I folded the easement map carefully. Outside, irrigation water moved through the ditch behind the barn, with a low, steady sound I had heard my entire life without really thinking about it. Now every drop sounded different. Not because the water had changed, because I finally understood what my father had been protecting all those years. Marta exhaled slowly on the phone. What do you want to do? I looked toward the subdivision lights glowing faintly beyond the pasture. Vanessa Holloway still thought she was fighting a rancher trying to buy land. She had no idea she was standing on top of paperwork older than her entire neighborhood. And for the first time since the deputies rolled through my gate, I felt the balance shift. Don't threaten them yet, I said quietly. Let them keep talking. Marta Reyes understood immediately, because people who think they are winning usually get careless. Vanessa Holloway got careless by Friday. The first drone appeared over my south pasture just after sunrise. I heard it before I saw it, a sharp electric buzzing, cutting across the sound of cattle moving toward the feed troughs. The thing hovered above my irrigation ditch, camera pointed downward like somebody filming a crime scene. Sadie spotted it first. Dad, she shouted from the fence line. They're recording us again. Again. That word mattered. Because it was not the first drone. I grabbed my phone and recorded the drone circling low over my cattle pens before it pulled away toward Silver Creek Estates. An hour later, the footage appeared online. Exclusive aerial images of my ranch. Vanessa's coalition page claimed my irrigation runoff threatened Willow Creek and endangered sensitive residential water resources. The video had dramatic music underneath and bright red arrows pointing toward muddy cattle tracks beside the ditch like hoofprints were environmental terrorism. By lunchtime, local reporters were calling again. Claire muted the kitchen television after the third station replayed the footage beside headlines about community safety concerns. Then the real sabotage started. I found the south fence cut open that evening. 4 strands of wire sliced clean beside the irrigation crossing. One of my calves had already wandered halfway toward County Road 16 before Sadie spotted it. I crouched beside the fence wire while Sheriff Cole Bennett stood nearby studying the cuts. Bolt cutters, he said. Clean ones. He scanned the pasture slowly. You got enemies before this? No. Cole nodded toward Silver Creek Estates glowing on the ridge above us. Looks like you do now. The next morning, somebody dumped dead trout beside Willow Creek. 6 of them. Fresh enough to smell. Positioned perfectly for photographs. By the time I reached the creek, 2 reporters were already there beside a white SUV marked Western Colorado News. One woman pointed a microphone toward me immediately. Mr. Mercer, HOA residents claim toxic agricultural runoff may have contaminated local fish habitats. Would you like to respond? I stared at the fish. Rainbow trout, store-bought, not native creek fish. I crouched beside one and turned it carefully with my boot. A clean knife cut ran beneath the gills, prepared fish. Not creek kills. The reporter kept pressing. Do you deny responsibility? Before I could answer, Sheriff Bennett stepped between us. You got lab reports? He asked. The reporter blinked. No. Then stop calling contamination before testing. Cole looked down at the fish again. Then quietly, these came from somewhere else. That shifted the room instantly. The cameraman lowered his lens slightly. The reporter changed tone. Sheriff, are you suggesting the scene was staged? I'm suggesting, Cole said evenly, that somebody wants a headline real bad. By afternoon, another problem arrived. Richard Holloway filed suit. The paperwork hit my attorney's office before dinner. Public nuisance claim, projected property value damages, environmental threat allegations, request for emergency injunction against my Pike Ranch purchase. Marta drove out herself that evening, carrying the filing inside a thick red folder. This is garbage, she said, the moment she stepped into my kitchen. Claire poured coffee while Marta spread papers across the table. Half these claims repeat the HOA complaints word for word, but this part matters. She pointed to a paragraph buried near the back, Silver Creek Development Preservation Group. What is that? I asked. Marta slid over another document, corporate registration records, shell company. I scanned the page once before stopping cold. Managing investment partner, Richard Holloway. I looked up slowly. Vanessa's husband had financial ties to a private development group. Suddenly, everything snapped together. The HOA complaints, the pressure on Eleanor Pike, the fake environmental panic, the drone footage, the lawsuit. This had never been about preserving the valley. They wanted Pike Ranch, and they needed my fencing dead before closing day. Claire sat down quietly across from us. So they destroy Wade publicly, she said. Then buy the land themselves. Marta nodded once. That's exactly what they're trying to do. Silence settled over the kitchen. Outside, sprinklers ticked slowly across the pasture, while headlights from Silver Creek Estates moved along the ridge above us. I looked again at Richard Holloway's name on the investment filing. Then I remembered the pipeline easement folded inside the barn trunk. They still did not know what sat underneath my pasture, but they were escalating fast enough that sooner or later, somebody inside that HOA was going to force the wrong document into daylight. And when that happened, the balance of power in this valley was going to change all at once. Marta Reyes arrived at my ranch before sunrise Monday, carrying 2 bankers' boxes full of records requests and corporate filings. She dropped them onto the kitchen table beside Claire's coffee mugs. I spent all weekend digging, she said, and Richard Holloway's sloppier than he thinks. Inside the first box sat property transfer records tied to Silver Creek Development Preservation Group, the same shell company named in Richard's lawsuit. Only now, Marta had connected it to 3 luxury developers from Denver and Scottsdale. One document mattered more than the others. A proposed subdivision concept map, future phase expansion. The shaded outline covered nearly the entire Pike Ranch, luxury view estates, private trout pond, exclusive ridge homes. My jaw tightened reading it. Vanessa Holloway had spent 2 weeks calling me a threat to the valley, while secretly planning to carve 800 acres of grazing land into vacation properties. Claire flipped through the pages slowly. They already drew the streets, she said quietly. Marta nodded. They were counting on Wade losing financing. I looked toward the western pasture through the kitchen window. Eleanor Pike still believed she was fighting people who cared about conservation. In reality, she was standing between developers and millions of dollars. Marta pulled one final folder from the box. This is the important part. Inside sat pipeline easement records from 1962, along with renewal amendments signed over decades by the Mercer family and the Valley Water Cooperative. The red line on the survey map crossed directly beneath my lower pasture before feeding Silver Creek Estates. Main residential supply pipeline. No alternate route. No secondary access. Nothing. Marta tapped the clause I had found inside the barn trunk. Termination rights upon sustained harassment, interference, or material harm caused in bad faith by benefiting parties. Wade, she said carefully. You have enough now. I already knew what she meant. The HOA had filed false environmental complaints, interfered with agricultural financing, supported fraudulent claims, encouraged trespassing and sabotage, filed a nuisance lawsuit tied to undeclared development interests, paper trail, dates, signatures, everything documented. Claire folded her arms. If you terminate the easement, Marta answered before I did. The subdivision keeps water temporarily under state emergency continuity rules. But future contract renewal becomes a disaster. Silver Creek's current delivery agreement expired in less than a year. Without renewal, property values inside the subdivision would collapse almost overnight. No guaranteed water access meant banks stopped financing homes. Insurance rates exploded. Developers vanished. The entire HOA had unknowingly declared war on the single family controlling their future water negotiations. I leaned back in my chair slowly. No threats, I said. Marta raised an eyebrow. You're still being nice? I'm being careful. Because once this moved into the open, there would be no putting it back. By noon, Marta had formally filed records requests exposing Richard Holloway's ownership interest in the development group. At 2:17 p.m., I drove down to the lower pasture carrying the original easement maps in a leather folder. The pipeline markers were still there if you knew where to look. Small iron survey posts nearly buried beneath 50 years of grass and dirt. I followed the route on foot. Past the cottonwoods, past the old cattle guard, past the irrigation ditch. Liam and I used to clean every spring before he died. Then finally toward the ridge below Silver Creek Estates, where 220 homes sat connected to a pipeline. Most of them probably never thought about once, until now. I stopped near the center of the pasture, where the main line crossed beneath my boots. Then I unfolded the termination notice Marta had drafted. Formal notification of review and non-renewal proceedings regarding easement agreement 1962 to 14B due to documented bad faith interference and material damages. Legal, measured, cold. I signed it beside the hood of my truck. The certified letters went out before sunset. Every HOA board member, every subdivision attorney, every county office connected to the water cooperative. The next morning, Silver Creek Estates woke up to panic. Phones started ringing before breakfast. By noon, local Facebook groups exploded with screenshots of the notice. Can they really do this? Does Mercer control the pipeline? Are we losing water? Vanessa Holloway stayed silent publicly, which told me everything. Because if she had known the easement existed before this week, she never would have escalated the fight this far. That evening, just after dark, headlights appeared outside my ranch gate. White Range Rover, Vanessa Holloway herself. For the first time since this war started, she had come alone. And from the way she sat gripping the steering wheel without getting out, I realized something important. She was finally scared. The White Range Rover idled outside my ranch gate while dust drifted across the headlights. I stood on my side of the cattle guard with my hands in my jacket pockets and watched Vanessa Holloway decide whether pride mattered more than panic. Panic won. She stepped out slowly. Gone was the polished confidence from the HOA videos and television interviews. No camera crew, no matching subdivision polo shirts, no husband standing behind her. Just Vanessa alone beside a locked ranch gate she suddenly understood she could not control. Mr. Mercer, she said carefully. I did not answer immediately. The silence forced her to keep talking. I think there's been a misunderstanding. That almost made me smile. 2 weeks earlier, she had called me an environmental threat to the valley. Now we were having a misunderstanding. What exactly are we misunderstanding? I asked. She glanced toward the lower pasture where the buried pipeline crossed beneath the grass. The HOA board received your notice. I know, you're threatening residential water access. No, I said evenly. I'm reviewing an easement agreement after repeated bad faith interference. She crossed her arms tightly against the evening wind. Our residents are terrified. I thought about Sadie sitting at the kitchen table, trying not to cry after kids called her the polluter's daughter. Funny how fear suddenly mattered when it reached expensive homes. Vanessa took a breath. If certain complaints were inappropriate, I'm prepared to recommend they be withdrawn. Certain complaints? The environmental filings, the county objections, the lawsuit discussion. I noticed the wording immediately. Not apologies. Negotiations. That told me Richard Holloway was still trying to salvage something. You already filed the lawsuit, I said. Her jaw tightened slightly. That can still be resolved. There it was again. Not truth, damage control. I leaned one arm against the gate. You threw rocks at my property. You tried freezing my financing. Your residents harassed Eleanor Pike at her own home. Somebody cut my fences and staged fake contamination beside my creek. Vanessa looked genuinely surprised by that last part, which meant she either had not ordered it herself or Richard had stopped telling her everything. Interesting. I had nothing to do with vandalism, she said quickly. Then maybe you lost control of your people. That landed harder than I expected, because she did not deny it. The wind pushed dust across the cattle guard between us, while the subdivision lights glowed above the ridge behind her. Finally, she said the thing she had actually come to say. What would it take for you to rescind the easement review? Not whether I would, what it would cost. I watched her carefully before answering. Why are you really scared of Pike Ranch? Her expression shifted too fast to hide it. There's no hidden agenda here. Then why did your husband's shell company submit a competing development bid? That hit like a rifle shot. Vanessa went completely still. For the first time since this started, I saw uncertainty break through the performance. You've been investigating us. No, I said quietly. You investigated yourselves. I just followed the paperwork. She looked away toward the dark outline of Pike Ranch, beyond the fence line. And then she made the mistake. Marta had predicted somebody eventually would. Those ridge lots are worth millions if the county rezones them. The second the words left her mouth, she realized what she had done. Not conservation, not environmental safety, development, luxury homes, exactly what Eleanor Pike feared. I let the silence sit there long enough to hurt. Vanessa recovered fast, but not fast enough. You're recording this, aren't you? I did not answer, because I was. Phone in my jacket pocket, audio running since the moment she stepped out of the SUV. She laughed once under her breath, angry at herself now. Richard said you were just a rancher. I looked past her toward Silver Creek Estates. He should read the easement before picking a fight. Vanessa stepped closer to the gate. What do you want? The honest answer surprised even me. I wanted her to understand what she had done to this valley, to Eleanor, to my daughter, to families whose names existed here long before Silver Creek Estates became marketing brochures and vacation property listings. But instead, I gave her the legal answer. I want the truth on public record. She stared at me for several seconds. Then, if this goes public, Silver Creek collapses. I thought about the fake contamination story, the lawsuit, the cameras pointed at my cattle like I was a criminal. You should have considered that before you started lying. She looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she climbed back into the Range Rover and shut the door hard enough to shake dust from the gateposts. I watched her drive away down the county road without turning around once. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. A few minutes later, I emailed the audio file directly to Marta Reyes, then another copy to the county commissioners, and one more to the State Agricultural Loan Board, because after tonight, this fight was no longer about accusations. Now it was about evidence. The recording spread through county offices faster than I expected. By the next afternoon, Marta Reyes had already filed it as part of a supplemental response to Richard Holloway's lawsuit. The State Agricultural Loan Board received a copy before lunch. County commissioners received another before close of business. And suddenly, the story changed. Not publicly at first. Publicly, Vanessa Holloway still posted polished statements online about protecting the valley. Silver Creek's residents still shared slogans about environmental responsibility and responsible growth. But privately, phones started ringing. Different phones. People who had ignored me 2 weeks earlier suddenly wanted meetings. County staff returned calls faster. Environmental investigators stopped sounding suspicious and started sounding cautious. One state reviewer quietly admitted the HOA's contamination claims looked increasingly coordinated. That was bureaucratic language for somebody lied. Meanwhile, Richard Holloway stopped speaking to reporters completely, which told me Marta's records request had landed exactly where it needed to. By Wednesday morning, local news stations had discovered the shell company filings themselves. One Denver reporter aired aerial maps showing the proposed luxury subdivision planned for Pike Ranch, future ridge estates, private trout access, executive mountain villas. The same people accusing me of destroying the valley had secretly designed streets across grazing land they did not even own yet. Silver Creek residents started turning on each other online almost immediately. You told us this was about pollution. Wait. There was a development deal? Are our HOA dues funding lawsuits? By noon, Vanessa shut down comments on the HOA Facebook page. Too late. The damage was already moving through the valley. That evening, I drove to Eleanor Pike's ranch with the final purchase documents in a leather folder beside me on the truck seat. She opened the front door before I reached the porch. "You look tired," she said. "So do you. That means we're probably doing something right." Inside, Eleanor signed the closing paperwork at her kitchen table, while Marta Reyes notarized each page carefully. No speeches, no dramatic celebration, just paper, signatures, and 80 years of ranching land staying exactly what it was supposed to stay. Before I left, Eleanor handed me one final document. Agricultural conservation easement. Permanent. Binding. The Pike Ranch could never become a subdivision now. Not under me. Not under anybody after me. I looked up slowly. "You already prepared this?" Eleanor nodded. "My husband made me promise years ago." Her eyes drifted toward the western windows. "Land remembers what people do to it." I signed. Just like that, the developers lost forever. The next morning, Silver Creek Estates exploded. A leaked copy of the conservation easement reached the HOA board before breakfast. According to Sheriff Cole Bennett, one resident screamed at Vanessa during an emergency meeting loud enough for people outside the clubhouse to hear. Because now the homeowners understood something terrifying. There was never going to be a luxury expansion, increasing their property values. Instead, they had picked a war with the family, controlling the water pipeline feeding their subdivision. And they had lost leverage. By Friday, longtime Valley families started publicly backing me. Acequia commissioners attended county meetings beside Marta Reyes. Ranchers who normally avoided politics signed statements supporting my purchase. Even people who disliked me personally hated developers more. Sheriff Bennett stopped by the ranch late that afternoon, carrying coffee from the diner in town. "You've got half the valley behind you now," he said. "That'll disappear quick if I make one stupid move." Cole nodded slowly. "That's why people trust you more than them." I looked toward the irrigation ditch running beside the barn. Water moved quietly through the channel exactly like it had when my father was alive. Exactly like it had when Liam and I cleaned weeds from the gates every spring as kids. The valley itself had not changed. Only the people trying to own it. Cole leaned against the porch railing. There's one more thing. What? Vanessa filed somethings this morning. I already knew it would not be good. She challenged the water rights. Cole nodded once. State court filing. Claims partial abandonment of beneficial use. I exhaled slowly. That was desperate and dangerous. Because unlike social media accusations or HOA complaints, water court ran entirely on records. Dates, usage, history, facts. Which meant Vanessa Holloway had finally wandered into the one arena where emotion stopped mattering completely. And in trying to save Silver Creek Estates, she had just dragged the fight into the exact courtroom where her side was weakest. The county hearing took place on a Thursday morning inside the old courthouse in Alamosa. By 8:30, the hallway was packed, ranchers in work jackets, Silver Creek residents in pressed sweaters and sunglasses, county reporters, water attorneys, acequia commissioners. Everybody in the valley suddenly cared about water law. I arrived with Marta Reyes carrying 2 bankers' boxes full of records. Claire sat beside me in the second row, while Sadie stayed home with Eleanor Pike, who said courtrooms were no place for 12-year-old girls learning how ugly adults could become. Richard Holloway stood near the front, in a dark suit talking quietly, with 2 attorneys from Denver. Vanessa sat beside him stiff-backed and pale, staring straight ahead like she still believed posture could save her. Then the judge walked in. Judge Harold Whitaker had spent 30 years handling agricultural disputes across southern Colorado. The man had probably forgotten more about water law than most developers ever learned. He wasted no time. Mrs. Holloway's petition alleges partial abandonment of Mercer family water rights through non-use, he said. Counsel, proceed. Richard's attorney stood first. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes about reduced agricultural output, periods of lower irrigation volume, and changing land utilization patterns. Fancy language meant to suggest my family no longer fully used the water attached to the Mercer decree. Marta barely reacted. She just kept organizing documents calmly beside me. Then Richard's attorney made his mistake. The Mercer operation, he said confidently, has clearly shifted away from historically beneficial usage expectations. Judge Whitaker looked over his glasses. Counselor, he asked quietly, are you under the impression beneficial use applies only to crop irrigation? The attorney hesitated. That hesitation changed the room, because suddenly everybody realized the judge already knew where this was going. Marta stood. Your Honor, she said, the Mercer family has continuously maintained beneficial use under Colorado law through agricultural irrigation, watershed maintenance, and conservation flow partnership agreements dating back over a decade. She placed the first document before the judge. 1911 Original Water Decree, stamped, recorded, senior priority date. Judge Whitaker adjusted the paper slightly and read the filing date aloud. June 14, 1911. The room went quiet, not because people understood water law, because they understood age. That decree was older than every home in Silver Creek Estates combined. Marta kept going. Conservation partnership records, irrigation maintenance logs, water cooperative documents, flow reports signed by state inspectors. Every accusation Vanessa made collapsed under paperwork older than her subdivision. Then Marta introduced the pipeline easement agreements. That changed the room entirely. Richard Holloway's face tightened for the first time all morning when the easement maps hit the evidence table. Because now the hearing was no longer just about water rights. Now it was about leverage. Marta explained the renewal clauses carefully. The HOA's residential water access depended on cooperative negotiations attached to Mercer-controlled land and majority-held water shares. Judge Whitaker leaned back slowly. Mrs. Holloway, he said, were you aware your organization was filing hostile actions against the majority shareholder tied to your subdivision's water infrastructure? Vanessa looked toward Richard before answering. That alone was enough. The judge noticed it too. Richard stood quickly. Your Honor, this matter is unrelated to. It became related, Judge Whitaker interrupted. The moment your clients filed coordinated interference actions against a party connected to ongoing infrastructure agreements. Silence again, heavy this time. Then Marta delivered the final blow. She submitted the audio transcript from Vanessa's gate conversation, the section mentioning Luxury Ridge development, future property values, developer expectations. The courtroom changed after that. Not emotionally. Mathematically, because now there was motive. The environmental outrage had not been about safety. It had been about land acquisition. Judge Whitaker read several pages silently before setting the transcript down. Then he looked directly at me for the first time all morning. Mr. Mercer, he said, do you intend to terminate water access to Silver Creek Estates? Every sound disappeared. Even Richard Holloway stopped moving. I could feel 200 eyes waiting for the answer. Because legally, everyone in that room finally understood something terrifying. I could. I stood slowly. The old wood floor creaked beneath my boots. My family's been protecting water in this valley since before Silver Creek existed, I said evenly. We irrigated through droughts, floods, freezes, and bad markets. We worked beside families whose names never ended up on subdivision signs. Nobody moved. I looked briefly toward Vanessa Holloway, then back to the judge. I came here to protect a valley, I said quietly, not destroy one. Judge Whitaker held my gaze a moment longer before nodding once. Then he looked toward Richard Holloway and Vanessa. I strongly suggest, he said carefully, that all parties reconsider their current positions before this court proceeds further. That was judge language for, end this now before it gets worse. And for the first time since this started, I watched real fear move across the faces of the people who thought they could bury a rancher under paperwork. The settlement talks began less than 24 hours later. Not because Vanessa Holloway suddenly discovered morality. Because the numbers finally reached the homeowners. By Friday morning, rumors about the water contracts had spread through Silver Creek Estates so fast that several residents contacted the county asking whether their mortgages could be affected if the pipeline dispute continued. The answer was yes. That changed everything. The emergency HOA meeting that night lasted nearly 4 hours. According to Sheriff Cole Bennett, residents walked in angry at me and walked out furious at Vanessa and Richard Holloway. People who bought mountain homes for peace do not react well when they discover their HOA president secretly gambled with the neighborhood's water infrastructure, especially while hiding a luxury development deal. By Saturday afternoon, Marta Reyes received the official proposal. Silver Creek Estates would withdraw every complaint, dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice, issue a public apology to Eleanor Pike, cover all legal fees connected to the harassment campaign, accept independent oversight on future water negotiations. Marta read the offer twice in my kitchen. Then she looked at me carefully. You won. I stared out toward the pasture. No, I said quietly. The valley did, because winning would have been easy. Destroying them would have been easy too. That was the part nobody outside ranch country understands. Power feels loud when you first get it, but real power is usually quiet, measured, patient. The Mercer family could have dragged Silver Creek Estates through years of litigation. We could have refused renewal negotiations entirely and watched property values collapse house by house. Legally, we had the leverage. But my father had taught me something long before he died. Land lasts longer than anger. 3 days later, the final county hearing reconvened. This time, the courtroom looked different. No television cameras crowding the aisle. No dramatic statements from Vanessa Holloway. No reporters chasing environmental scandals, just consequences. Richard Holloway sat beside his attorneys looking 20 years older than when this fight started. His law firm had already placed him on administrative leave, pending ethics review over the undeclared development conflict. Vanessa looked worse, not angry, not arrogant, embarrassed. Judge Whitaker reviewed the settlement terms in complete silence before finally asking one question. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "are you satisfied with this resolution?" Every eye in the room shifted toward me again. I stood slowly. "The Mercer family accepts the settlement," I said. "On one condition." Vanessa's attorney stiffened immediately. I continued before anyone could interrupt. "The new water contract will include mandatory conservation upgrades for Silver Creek Estates." Confused murmurs spread through the courtroom. Marta smiled slightly beside me because she already knew where this was going. I looked directly at the judge. 10% of all future HOA water fees will fund valley irrigation repairs, agricultural scholarships, and youth conservation programs. Now the room went silent for a completely different reason. Not fear this time, surprise. Judge Whitaker leaned back slowly. "You're redirecting the money into the valley?" "Yes, Your Honor." Vanessa stared at me like she genuinely could not understand the decision. Maybe she never would, because people like her saw land as investment potential. People like my father saw it as responsibility. The agreement passed before noon. 72 hours later, Silver Creek Estates formally withdrew every accusation filed against me or the Pike Ranch. The public apology to Eleanor Pike appeared in the Valley Register the following Sunday, beside a full retraction of the environmental claims. Richard Holloway resigned from his law firm before the state bar investigation finished. Vanessa listed her home quietly 2 months later. By the first snowfall, she was gone from Colorado entirely. The Pike Ranch closing happened under clear skies in late October. No speeches, no cameras, just signatures and the sound of cattle moving through the lower pasture, while irrigation water flowed beside the cottonwoods one last time before winter. After the paperwork was done, Eleanor Pike handed me an old framed photograph from her living room. My brother Liam standing beside my father near the creek gate 30 years earlier, both covered in dirt, both laughing. "You keep this now," she said softly. I carried the photograph home in silence. That evening, Sadie followed me down to the calving barn, carrying a lantern, while the first snow drifted across the valley. One of the newborn calves struggled onto shaky legs beside its mother. Sadie smiled for the first time in weeks. "I want to name him Liam," she said. I looked out through the barn doors toward the dark ridge where Silver Creek Estates sat quiet beneath the snow. Then down toward the hidden pipeline crossing beneath Mercer pasture. Water still moved through it because in the end, I renewed the contract. Not for Vanessa Holloway, not for the HOA, for the valley. For the families who never asked to be dragged into somebody else's greed. For the understanding that land and water are not trophies to weaponize every time money enters the room. And because my father was right, real strength is having the power to ruin people and choosing not to.
That's probably the biggest lesson I took from this home fight. Wade could turn the water off. Legally, he had the leverage. After everything the HOA threw at him, the accusation, the pressure on his family, the lies about his ranch, most people would understood if decided to make them pay for it. But he didn't. He protected the land, protected the valley, and made sure the water flowing for everyone living there. And honestly, that's something a lot of folks forget these days. Land isn't just property on paper. Out here, it's carrying history, responsibility, and the work of people who came long before us. The stronger people are usually the quiet ones, the ones who know exactly what they could do, but choose restraints because they still care about the community around them. If this story means something to you, let me know down in the comments. And if you ever deal with an HOA or land dispute or somebody trying to push you around unfairly, drop a simple standing form below. I read every comment and I also enjoy hearing your stories. And if you want more story about rent life, land rights, quiet courage, and ordinary people standing their ground the right way, go ahead and subscribe. There's another one coming next week.